So we'll start this morning with just some brief meditational sounds and chanting, and then we'll go into our presentation. So 3 omkars at the beginning, you can join me, and then 3 at the end. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Let's see. I'm supposed to take this out, right? Good? We're waiting for our screen. I hope everyone had good rest. Good. Well, this is very dramatic, right? Slow awakening. Okay. An awakening, a purification of the heart. Now, last night, I perhaps overloaded you with information about the heart. But very simply, the heart is something that is a source of energy that emanates and radiates outward. And it's powerful. When Gandhi said, if you want to change the world, change yourself. Because it begins with the purification of the heart and the power of the heart that can be unleashed and released to the rest of the world. Very powerful. He did it in his own way, in his, setting, and other great sages have done it as well. So what we're here to do is to understand the value of looking at sacred texts as ways of opening up the heart, awakening the heart, and purifying the heart. So that's what I want to do today, to this morning and this afternoon. So this idea of Leela. Leela means a divine play, divine acts. And so from the Leela and reading about the Leela, studying the Leela, we can begin that process. So the first Leela I want to focus on this morning is the Bhagavad Gita. But before we do so, I want to summarize a little bit the three functions of Leela. So when we read these different Leelas, these sacred texts that contain Leela, like Bhagavad Gita, the Bhagavata Purana, and so many different texts, we really are functioning, the Leela is functioning in three different ways. One is the play for its own sake. So Arjuna and Krishna in this Leela, this Leela of teaching, is there for their own sake, Arjuna and Krishna's relationship. And we're here to witness that. So when we witness it, it elevates our consciousness. It's a kind of revelation for us, for our consciousness to be raised and elevated. We all know what that feels like when you watch a really bad film. Our consciousness is lowered. We watch something that's very inspiring, it's lifted up. We all know how that feels. But then the third item is it offers a sacred teaching, and that's what we want to look at today. So the teaching. So every sacred teaching does sort of four things, and I've already sort of outlined it a little bit last night, but let me be really clear. The worldly conditioning of the heart. So many of the sacred texts in India start with that. And this can be a little disconcerting, reading a text that begins with that, And I'll show you what that's like in comparison to other sacred texts of the world. But the worldly conditioning of the heart, this is such a universal situation. We all are conditioned by the world in which we came. The sages even say we didn't just come and get conditioned by the world into which we were born, but that we brought with us previous conditionings from a lifetime that was occurring before, and maybe even before that one. So who knows what we bring to this life, and then we get born into this life and we discover, well, look at that, there's mom, there's dad. Oh, I've got some siblings? What's that about? Who are they? And then friends and school friends, and then it just expands. And all of this is part of our history. It's part of our history. The friends that loved us, the friends that abused us, and everything else. And Patanjali says that our conditioning can be either the source of bondage or the source of liberation. And we're going to see this in the Bhagavad Gita. So secondly, there's the worldly conditioning of the heart, but then there's the opportunity and the possibility of an awakening and opening of the heart. And third, the purification and deepening of the heart. And fourth, the free-flowing and overflowing of the heart, which is perfection. So that's something we can all look forward to. So the three most sacred texts of the world, it should not surprise you, is one, the Bible, with 31,000 plus verses, the Quran, with 6,200 or so verses, and then the Bhagavad Gita with only 700 verses. I mean, if these other sacred texts take thousands of verses, what can you do in 700 verses? Well, you can do an awful lot. You can do an awful lot. India is fond of essentializing things, putting things in language that is so powerful and that's so deep that there are teachings, endless teachings that could come about just from a few words. So the Bhagavad Gita, among all of the sacred texts coming out of India, is the most commented upon text. Some 83, 84 commentaries, serious commentaries on the one text over its history. So the Bible sounds like a scripture. It sounds like it. I mean, listen to this. It's beautiful, right? In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was formless, void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. It sounds like a scripture. I mean, it really does. I mean, God is right there. His energy, his power, a kind of implied cosmogenesis, everything is there. Moving to the New Testament, the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Mark is the first gospel writer. As it is written in the prophet Isaiah, "See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way." Voice of one crying out in the wilderness, "Prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight." Sounds like a scripture. God is there, Jesus Christ is there, the sort of prediction of Jesus coming and so on. The Gospel of John is very mystical and speaks with sort of a Gnostic tone and wording. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. The Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and all things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. Sounds like a scripture. What about the Quran? Beautiful. First surah, very short surah. Glory to Allah, Most High, full of grace and mercy. He created all, including man. To man, he gave a special place in his creation. He honored man to be his agent, and to that end, imbued him with understanding, purified his affections, and gave him spiritual insights so that man should understand nature, understand himself, and know Allah through his wondrous signs, and glorify him in truth, reverence, and unity. I don't know about you, but it sounds like a scripture to me. Okay, Bhagavad Gita. On the field of dharma, on the field of Kuru, assembled together, desiring to fight, were my armies, and indeed those of the sons of Pandu. How did they act, O Sanjaya? Doesn't sound like a scripture, does it? I mean, there's no God or supreme being being invoked here. There's no agent of his or of that. There are no divine acts being mentioned here. There's not even light, which is pretty universal. Not even light is mentioned. So what is going on here? If one knows how to read into the verses of the Bhagavad Gita, it goes so deep. And I'm going to try to give you a little sense of that. When I was presenting the Bhagavad Gita, which I've done several times at the Smithsonian, I presented this. I said, does Bhagavad Gita sound like a scripture? What do you do with the Bhagavad Gita opening? How is this meaningful in any kind of really spiritually valuable way? The Gita does something different than the other scriptures. It doesn't front load God, the divine, the supreme being. It front loads the human condition. And that's everywhere. Jesus doesn't mean everything to everybody. You know, in China, in the East, the Far East, Jesus is not that important. Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism is more important. So front-loading God is not as universally powerful, perhaps, the author of the Gita felt, as sort of front-loading the human condition, the nature of the human condition. And let me show you how that's there. Well, first of all, on the field of dharma, this means on the field of our essential internal nature. On the field, we all have an internal nature, and that's known as a field, kshetra, but later on in the 13th chapter of the Gita, kshetra is understood as the bodily, or as embodiment. So within that embodiment, or that embodied state, is an essential nature that's in there at the core. But then on the field of Kuru, Kuru is the dynasty from which all of these warriors come. And so that's our conditioned external nature. So they come together, samaveta, yoyutsavaha, in conflict. And that's the human condition. Our internal pure nature in juxtaposition to our external outer conditioned nature come together in conflict, in tension. Yoga is the full harmonizing of those two. Plain and simple. Does that make sense so far? Are we good? Those two come together in all of us. Our internal pure nature with our external conditioned nature, they come together, samaveta, they come together, yoyutsavaha. They're fighting. They're in conflict. And then, of course, what could be more conflictual than family? I mean, look at this. Were my armies and indeed the sons of Pandu, that's his brother. If you want to find conflict, just look at your immediate family, okay? Something's always going on in family. You know, this one, I can't talk to this one. That one I could talk to. He or she understands me, but this one doesn't understand me at all. And this one's arguing with this other one. And just you don't have to go very far into the world to understand conflict. Just Look at your immediate family situation, okay? Not always everybody, but it's pretty popular place for a conflict, okay? So right there, look at this. Were my armies, and indeed those of the sons of Pandu, my brother. My brother's armies are fighting my armies. This is a fratricidal war. So again, no better place to go than family to understand conflict. And then this last statement. How did they act? Kim Makuravata Sanjaya. Writ large, one can understand this question to be something that is really profound. How do we act, therefore, in a world of conflict, pain, and suffering? What do we do about it? This is something that confronts everybody. It confronts everyone. Okay, I'm in this world. Lots of people are suffering. I'm quite privileged. In fact, I'm quite spoiled compared to most people in the world. So I'll just ignore them. I'll just ignore everyone who's suffering. But that itself is a suffering condition. So that, we find out, is not the right approach. Well, if I'm not going to ignore them, then what do I do about all these people in the world that are suffering? What do we do? Well, in a sense, this was Arjuna's plight. We are Arjunas, okay? So when we read the Bhagavad Gita, we are being Arjuna. So let's talk about Arjuna. First of all, before we do, I guess I put this slide here, that even the name of the work, Bhagavad Gita, is quite instructive. The word Bhagavat means the one who embraces all parts of reality, the one who embraces us as infinitesimal parts of reality. So Bhagavat, the word Bhagavat, right in the title of the work, means that we're already being embraced. And we talked a little bit about that last night, but we're already being embraced. But do we realize it? And since we may not realize it, there's the Gita, a secret song of longing and yearning for the love coming from human hearts, a love call coming from the divine to all souls. So this is a title that states the divine is quietly singing to all of us, calling to all of us. And of course, Krishna is famously known for playing the flute, his divine love call. So really, the question I want to pose in front of all of you today is, can we hear that calling? That's part of the awakening. So a love call that takes the form of the sounding of a divine flute, for which Krishna is known, very well known, as you'll see later, or in the form of divine teachings. So in the Gita, his flute song is really a song of philosophical verse, as we'll see. So in the front of my Bhagavad Gita cover, this cover has didactic purpose, not just a pretty cover, has a purpose behind the imagery. Well, first of all, we can see the subtitle, The Beloved Lord's Secret Love Song. Why is it secret? It's secret because we're not ready to hear it. So that's why it's secret. It's quiet. Haven't you had a friend or someone who wanted to be your friend who kept on pushing you to be their friend? Isn't that kind of annoying? Krishna doesn't want to be that. He really doesn't want to be that. He wants us to be ready. And every relationship seeks balance, whether we are conscious of it or not. Krishna is very quiet. The divine presence within our hearts is a very quiet presence until we activate it. And so what I'm showing here in the cover is down here is the conflict. You see the horses coming together. It's hard to see in this picture, but there's Krishna on the chariot, Arjuna here on the chariot. Here are the armies. They're all coming together, and that's the outer world. But transcendent to that conflictual situation, is this arch of transcendence. And you can't see it well here, but you can see it on the book's front cover. But through the arch is a door, is a doorway into the innermost regions of the heart, where we can find the resolution to all conflicts that are going on the outside. That is what the Gita is about, is finding resolution in a world of conflict. How do we do that? So the Bhagavad Gita begins by, frankly, stepping into a story that has already begun. Okay? And many of you know this, that the Mahabharata, the great text of 100,000 verses, is extracted. The Bhagavad Gita is an extraction of only 700 verses, not even 1% of the Mahabharata, of 100,000. So we're stepping into a story about 2/3 of the way through the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita begins. So we're stepping into a story that's already begun. But that shouldn't be so foreign to us. When we were born, we're already stepping into a story that's already begun. Have you noticed? Like, what's this? I remember when my son was born, I thought there would be an automatic, like symbiotic compatibility, harmonize, right? He looked, I was the first person he saw when he was born, which was probably a mistake. But I couldn't have anticipated that. He looked up at me. He went, like this. I said, whoa, hold on. Oh, we can work this out. Immediately, conflict in the family, right? I hadn't even said anything to him. I was just smiling at him, but he didn't like that terribly. We are all stepping into a story that's already begun. This is very disconcerting. What do I do with this? What do I do with all these people I'm meeting? And I'm realizing that they also have feelings. I thought I was the only one, right? Going from anamoya to pranamoya, realization, you may have heard these terms. So realizing from a state of nourishing love and mother's love to a state of, wow, I realize that I'm living and other people are living and they feel things the way I feel things. Wow, okay. So what happens here is the Bhagavad Gita does open up onto a battlefield where a conflict, a military conflict is about to occur. I mean, what kind of way is that to open up a scripture? But again, as you just saw, if you read into the texts with an awareness of its message, you read on various levels, which is part of reading sacred texts and repeating the reading of sacred texts. Because every time we repeat Tadasana, we do Tadasana a little better. That's the purpose of repetition in yoga, is not to create boredom, but to go deeper each time we repeat something. So that's why we can do Tadasana hundreds of times. And other asanas, well, each verse is like an asana. We should practice them over and over. So the story, I'm going to save you a reading of about 70,000 verses right now, okay, in 1 minute. Basically, there's one king, great King Bharata. Everyone loved Bharata. He was loved by everybody. It's sort of like Trump. Everyone, okay, maybe that's not a good example, but I'm not good with politics, okay? That's not my area of specialization, okay? So as soon as I start talking about something political, I don't know anything, okay? So I can't compare it to anything, but everyone did love Bharata, okay? He was really so loved. And he had two sons, King Dhritarashtra, which is the elder son, and King Pandu, the younger son. Now, King Dhritarashtra, when he was born blind. So he was not only congenitally blind, but he was also morally blind. He was just a not nice person, right? I mean, just evil, sort of naturally. He was just comfortable with evil. He was just a nasty guy. Some people are like that. They just come into there, they're just nasty people for whatever reason. He was like that. Pandu was like his father. The younger son was just lovable and morally upright and just like his father. Well, Dhritarashtra, let me see here. Dhritarashtra had had 99 sons. Now, I can't be sure of this, but I'm pretty sure he had more than one wife. I even thought maybe he had 3 wives, but then he would have had to have 11 sets of triplets. And how likely is that? So I think he had many wives. I don't know if he even knew how many wives he had. He was blind. So I'm not sure he knew. But anyway, he had many wives, and he had 99 sons somehow. But Pandu had only 5 sons. Okay, and they were known as the Pandavas. Usually a king, needs to appoint someone to take over his kingdom, to take the seat of the throne and all the power and riches. And usually it's the elder or eldest son. But this time, Bharata chose Pandu, because how can you pick an evil, blind king as someone to take over the kingdom? So Pandu was chosen, and this created a lot of tension between the brothers and their cousins, and the cousins of the Kauravas and the Pandavas. So the story goes that Pandu died an early, untimely death, while his 5 sons were still young, and too young to take the throne. So Uncle Dhrit, we can call him that. Dhritarashtra is hard to say. Most people can't say it. Dhritarashtra? You want to try that? Dhritarashtra? Just do Uncle Dhrit, that's fine. Uncle Dhrit moved into the palace when Pandu died, and there was plenty of room. Don't worry about that. But there was still the tension. And when the Pandavas' sons grew up, came of age, the cousins, the Pandavas said to their uncle, "We're now capable of ruling the kingdom, please leave." And he refused. So the Kauravas and the Pandavas had a dice match. And they agreed that whoever would win the dice match would be able to oust the other party for 13 years, banish the party for 13 years, not to return for those whole 13 years until, they could come back, and they would relinquish the power of the throne during that time, of course. So as it goes, the Pandavas lost the game to the Kauravas, and they were such gentlemen, even though they lost due to the fact that the Kauravas were cheating during the dice game, they still conceded the loss. So they went off for 13 years, they came back, and the kingdom was in worse situation. Chaos and lots of tariffs and different things like that. That's a word I don't even know what it means, but I just thought I'd throw it in. It's a modern term I hear, but so it was a mess. Things were a mess, and so the Pandavas said, "Look, we're back. We did our banishment, so please give us the kingdom back." Dhritarashtra refused. "Give us half the kingdom." He refused. "Give us a portion of the half of the kingdom." He refused. "Give us our neighborhood." And he refused. So they said, "This is intolerable. People are suffering. The kingdom is in the worst disarray than ever." And so what happened is invariably they had to go to war. And so they went to a place called Kurukshetra, where military persons fought military persons. There weren't citizens around. There weren't young children, older citizens, just warriors fighting warriors. And that is where the Bhagavad Gita begins. They line up on the battlefield, much like chessmen. I don't know if you know, but chess was invented in India, because that's the way armies would fight. It was very chivalrous. They would line up, just like chess pieces. They would line up. And in chess, you never see someone take their queen and just smash the king on the other side. That's the way we do wars now. But it was very chivalrous. At least it starts out chivalrous. The war gets pretty nasty as the text goes. But the point is, it starts out this way, and there is kind of a clock in the sky. It starts when certain constellations of stars are all in place. So this is where the Bhagavad Gita begins. And the narration by Sanjaya speaks about the conch shells being blown, which is a ceremonial ritual practice for worship, actually. So it was practically a kind of sacred war in some sense. Okay, so now this is not easy to see, but here is King Dhritarashtra. He's the one that actually speaks the very first verse to Sanjaya, his minister. Dharma kshetre kurukshetre samaveta yoyotsavaha mamaka pandavaschaiva kimakurvata Sanjaya. So the king is saying to Sanjaya, what's happening here? What is going on the battlefield? On the battlefield of Kurukshetra, on the battlefield of Dharma. So the Sanjaya is seeing, he's the opposite of his master. He's seeing through his heart, again, very symbolically powerful, he's seeing through his heart, in his heart, the conversation between Krishna and Arjuna, and you can't really see it, but this is what he's seeing. The chariot with the horses, right here in the background. The first chapter of 18 chapters is titled Arjuna Vashada Yoga. Arjuna Vashada Yoga. The yoga of Arjuna's state of hopelessness, state of despair. So talk about the human condition. This is exactly what the Bhagavad Gita begins with. And by the way, there are some commentators that completely skip over the first chapter. They don't know what to do with it. And the main person I'm thinking of is Shankaracharya. Not one verse receives a commentary from Shankaracharya because he does not believe the human condition actually exists. It's all delusional. But when you're in the human condition, it doesn't feel like it doesn't exist. Have you noticed? It really pretty much exists. So the Advaitin philosophy, when carried to an extreme, says our suffering doesn't even exist. It may be illusory, but it's not delusional. Illusory means temporary. It means that it's mirroring other things. But delusional means it doesn't exist. So Shankaracharya doesn't comment at all on the first chapter. And yet the first chapter, without the first chapter, you don't have the complete Bhagavad Gita, because the first chapter is resolved in the 18th chapter. The 18th chapter comes around full cycle to address everything in the first chapter. And I'll show you how that works. So Arjuna Vashada Yoga. No one thinks of a yoga as Vashada Yoga. These days we have Doga. Have you heard of that? I hadn't heard about it until I had a student who said, I'm practicing, Doga as well. And I laughed. I thought she was kidding me. But there is something called Doga, yoga with dogs. I've heard of all kinds of yoga. I mean, hula hoop yoga. It goes a little far. But anyway, but Vashada Yoga, this is an ancient text. Vashada Yoga, the yoga of hopelessness. Honestly, I was thinking of opening up a yoga studio. The yoga of hopelessness. Come one, come all. And once they get through that studio, I'd send them on to the normal studios, But the yoga of hopelessness. If hopelessness and a state of despair, as Patanjali says, it can either keep us into a very devastating state, or it can be the source of our elevation. And with Arjuna, it was the source of his perfection and elevation and perfection. So we want to be Arjunas when we are broken, or just even experiencing the inner war between the internal pure self and the external conditioned self. So the narration goes that there's an irresolvable ethical conflict. Arjuna says, midway through the chapter, I look upon those about to engage in battle, who are assembled here desiring to please the evil-minded son of Dhritarashtra in battle. That would be Duryodhana, who leads Dhritarashtra's army. He's the first of 99 sons. Interestingly named Duryodhana, which can mean difficult to fight, so a very good warrior, but it also could mean an evil fighter. It can mean dirty fighter. Can you imagine naming your firstborn Dirty Fighter? I mean, it takes an evil king to name your firstborn Dirty Fighter. So here, Arjuna's words are what you would expect from a warrior, a kshatriya, who's ready to engage in a battle to protect innocent persons. So this is what you first find in the Gita. But then, look what happens. Seeing my own relations, O Krishna, standing nearby, ready to fight, my limbs are sinking down and my mouth has become very dry. Also, my body trembles and the hairs of my limbs stand on end. I think this is, clinical depression. I mean, he's in bad shape. So this is where he goes from being a warrior and identified as a warrior who will protect and that sense of being a warrior, it has a sense of purpose. And it's what he was naturally sort of designed to do in this world. That was his dharma, his swadharma. But that was challenged when confronted with this battle. Finally, the chapter ends, of course, speaking about the shattered heart. We saw that last night a little bit. This hridaya vyadarayat, this shattered heart. At the end of the chapter, Sanjaya finishes it off by saying, thus speaking in the midst of conflict, Arjuna sat upon the seat of the chariot. Remember, we saw that the limb, the two birds on the limb, the limb of the tree on which two birds sat while one was eating the pipala fruit, the bittersweet fruit of this world. Well, analogous to the limb on which they were standing is the seat of the chariot. That's the heart. Casting aside his bow and arrow, his mind was tormented by sorrow. So this is how the first chapter ends. Now, Arjuna could have said to Krishna, look, I'm quitting, I'm going to walk off the battlefield. He could have said that. We can say that during our irresolvable ethical conflicts. We can say, we're just going to quit. I'm walking off, go ahead, I'll see you later, let me know what happens. He could have said that. He didn't. He sat there, and then he approached his teacher. So, this is that analogy of the self that we talked about last night. So Krishna is the faculty of discernment, the buddhi, his arms. But he doubles up also as the divine self, as the presence of the Supreme within the heart, who's also sitting on the chariot. You see, they're both sitting together, just like the two birds. Bless you. Govinda, as they say. And here, of course, the mind are the reins, the senses, the horses, and the body is the chariot. So it's not spoken of in quite this way in the Gita, but it is in the Kathopanishad, as we saw. But it's all here. What's happening is Arjuna is in the chariot with Krishna and spends 20 verses just his, of expressing or dumping the contents of his troubled heart onto Krishna. And Krishna says hardly anything, as I mentioned. 5 words only. 5 words, that's all. He was a very good listener. Very good listener. It's hard to find friends like that who will just listen. But this is what Arjuna needed to do. He dumped the contents of his troubled heart onto Krishna, and he just listened. There it is. There's Arjuna. And that berry became extremely bitter on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. So let's see what happens with this bird. So the shattered heart is what happens, but Arjuna turns to Krishna and basically says, Shishyasteham shadimam aham prapanam. I am your student. Please instruct me. I'm submitting myself unto you. So this is the turning point in the very beginning of the 2nd chapter, where Arjuna moves himself in the direction of his teacher, Krishna, who then begins to offer his teachings. And this is his way out of the conditioning. And you could summarize the whole teachings following 16 chapters up to the 18th chapter as basically be a yogi. That was his instruction, be a yogi. But what does that mean? What is the nature of action? What is the nature of sacrifice? What's the nature of the mind? What's the nature of the heart? What's the nature of this existence? What is the nature of the supreme existence? All of these topics are covered in the Bhagavad Gita's short 700 verses, although Krishna speaks 575 of those 700 verses. So even fewer verses that Krishna speaks than the totality of 700. Remarkable. So there they are. I took this picture on top of an elephant. I was sitting on an elephant, and okay, I see you don't believe me, that's fine. But I got a nice shot of both of them. And this is the sacred conversation between Arjuna. Dharmyam samvadam, sacred conversation between the two of them. And this is what we get to witness. This is what we get to contemplate when we read the Bhagavad Gita. We're almost in the position of Sanjaya, who witnesses the conversation. And this is where he says, I ask you, tell me what is... So, my very being is afflicted by a piteous weakness of spirit. That refers to the heart. My thoughts on dharma are completely bewildered. This refers to the cognitive apparatus. You know, I don't even know how to think about this. My spirit is downtrodden. I don't know how to think about this. And finally, I ask you, tell me what is definitely better for me. In other words, what's better for me to do? So the first quarter of the verse is really reflecting bhakti, the second, jnana, and the third, karma. It's anticipating these 3 yogas that are spoken of throughout the whole Gita. Okay? And the fourth is really where he says, Shishyaste shadhimamaham prapanam. I am your student. Please instruct me, for I have offered myself unto you. So the first chapter is the outer world of conflict, verses 1 through 19. The second set of verses, 8 verses, are the conflictual inner world. And the third is, of course, the shattered heart, the innermost world, where Arjuna is confronted by an irresolvable conflict. What is being taught here by the Gita? Irresolvable conflict. If I fight, I'm going to kill people on the other side that are my friends and relatives whom I love. But if I don't fight them, then they will take over a kingdom and they'll run it further into the ground as their king has already done. So he didn't know whether to fight or whether not to fight. And so he was damned no matter what he did. He said, you know, maybe I'll let them kill me, because why would I want to live in a kingdom where no one existed that I loved. If everyone was gone that I loved, why would I want to even live anyway? So I'm going to let them kill me. So he considered that in front of Krishna. But I can't do that because then they will take over the kingdom and chaos will abound in the kingdom. And he was going into matters of family order and caste and this and that. And that. All of his conditioning came out. Krishna is silent. He's just listening. And then concluding words. The 18th chapter, as I mentioned earlier, addresses those 4 parts that are found in the first chapter. The intermittent 16 chapters are, of course, extremely important to read. Don't skip over them. But it moves you toward the concluding chapter of the Gita in such a powerful way. The outer world of conflict is addressed by the great secret that Krishna gives us. The inner world of conflict with how to think about things is addressed by the greater secret. And then the shattered heart. The shattered heart is addressed by the greatest secret of all. Notice there are 49 verses here, 14 verses here, and then only 3 verses here. So sort of like a mountain, a message that takes the form of a mountain, and then finally concluding words. So it's a conversation within a conversation, as we've spoken of. Now, the relationships with Krishna, between Krishna and Arjuna, are a little complex. They're sort of multi-layered. You've got Arjuna as a warrior to a charioteer. Krishna is ostensibly right away. He comes across as simply a charioteer, driving a chariot. Simple enough, right? But then, when Arjuna has his breakdown, he is a friend to a confidant. He's likened unto a friend to a confidant. Krishna then becomes a confidant. Then, in the second chapter, he becomes like a student to a teacher. And then, later on, by the 4th chapter, but that's where it's beginning, but really by the 9th chapter of the Gita, he becomes a yogi in relation to divinity. And divinity, of course, takes 4 different forms. So you see how complex this gets. The karma yogi is in relation to the divine in everything. The Vishwarupa, the divine everywhere. The jnana yogi focuses on infinite being. The dhyana yogi, the divinity within the heart, remember the micro level of the heart, and then the macro level of the heart, are the first 2. The micro is the second. And then finally, the bhakti yogi is the intimate connection with divinity. And that's kaivalya. That's kaivalya yoga. So the human condition, as we've seen, is the conflict around us. Interactive confrontation. And then cognitive dissonance, confusion in thinking, and then finally despair and despondency. So this is what Arjuna, these are the stages through which Arjuna goes. So we need to contemplate the nature of the human condition. So this is what the Gita front loads. So it's important to understand the nature of the human condition, so the Gita says, so we can rise above it, beyond it. We're not eliminating the human condition. We're always going to be in a condition somewhere. The question is how to understand its purpose in elevating us, rather than binding us and bringing us further down. So the Bhagavat's embrace, we talked about the word Bhagavan, or as a Bhagavat, as in Bhagavad Gita, how the divine is embracing us with the The divine all around us, the divine everywhere without, and the divine deeply within. But these things are understood passively because we're not ready, according to the Gita, we're not ready to hear them. Arjuna was not ready right away. He had to go through this dumping of the contents of his heart. So when are we receptive? When are we ready to hear the teachings that Krishna gives to Arjuna? So let us be like Arjuna. Open ourselves up. Understand that the traumatic events that are happening around us or with us or in us are meant to open us up to something really, really important. In fact, maybe the most important thing. That's what the Gita is about. So I'm hoping that we'll go back to the Gita and read it deeper, more deeply and more deeply and more deeply. I can tell you my own journey with the Bhagavad Gita began when I was 15 years old. I started reading the Bhagavad Gita. In fact, it was my impetus to drop out of high school. My parents were a little bit unnerved by that, but they were highly educated people, but I asked them one day, I said, you know, I think I need to drop out of high school because I'm not learning anything there, but I'm learning everything from the Bhagavad Gita. So that's my high school. In fact, it's very high schooling. I tried to explain that to them. They didn't really get it, but they really believed in me. They sort of trusted me for some reason. They said, well, if you really feel this is the best thing, okay. I said, fine, great. So I read into the sacred texts of India for a year, Bhagavad Gita primarily, Yoga Sutra, Bhakti Sutra, different texts. And then I realized I needed to learn Sanskrit. So then I wanted to go back to school, but not to high school. They don't teach you Sanskrit in high school, but I found that Johns Hopkins, I could learn Sanskrit at Johns Hopkins. So I said to my parents, can I go to Johns Hopkins? They said, well, I don't know how you're going to get in without a high school diploma. I said, well, let's see what happens. So I'm not going to tell you the whole story because it's ridiculous, but I got in. They wanted a high school diploma. They requested a high school diploma. I sort of made a high school diploma because I was associated with a kind of hippie alternative school that was incorporated. And I asked them, do you, I didn't really attend because most of the students there were smoking dope and on drugs. And I went the way of yoga, they went the way of drugs. Those are two different ways to escape the Vietnam draft at the time. You'll hear more about that this evening. But the point is that I got in and I learned Sanskrit so I could go more deeply into the text that I was reading, because I noticed that in the yoga community, they were deeply committed to practice, but they didn't know how to pronounce the words even. Asana, have you ever heard that word? Asana. I don't mind people going and having an asana. I don't mind that at all. But that's not the word, asana. Okay? Asana. And other words like yogini, a female practitioner of yoga. Is a yogini? If it rhymes with fettuccine, capellini, it's an Italian dish. Yogini. So what I found was that the yoga community was so deeply committed to the practice, but they didn't have the knowledge that I thought was important. And the scholarly community were all armchair scholars that talked a lot of stuff, but didn't practice anything. You know, while they're teaching Bhagavad Gita in the classroom, they're on break and they're smoking cigarettes, they're eating meat, they're doing, you know, they're not living the Bhagavad Gita. So you had these two extremes I found, and I wanted to bring them together in my life. So that's why I've been reading Bhagavad Gita all these years, and just last week finding new things, new levels of meaning after how many decades? I can't even count that many anymore. And when I had to translate the Bhagavad Gita for HarperCollins, this was when I had to really get so serious about my reading of the Gita that I then found things that were scary because no one had ever written about them, but I found them. So I didn't know whether to talk about them at all. And that was the great secret, the greater secret, and the greatest secret of all. These are not Graham's terms. These are the terms of Krishna. But no one brings it out. So that was scary. Do I even write about it? Maybe I shouldn't. But my wife pushed me into doing it. So, you know, happy wife, happy life, right? So I did it for her. So anyway, the idea is the Bhagavad Gita is a book that keeps on giving. It just keeps on giving. And that's why we can read something hundreds of times and still have it speak to us. Still have it speak to us. So here it is. I show that chapter 1 and chapter 18 are intimately related. We'll go into that in a bit. So the text is known as the supreme secret of yoga. Yogam param, Guhyam param yogam. That's it. Guhyam param yogam. Sanjaya, in the almost last verse of the Gita, summarizes it, or titles the whole teaching as the supreme secret of yoga. So what is that supreme secret of yoga? What is that? Or is this just a very fluffy way of calling the conversation, a very kind of literary flourish, the supreme secret of yoga? No, it's not a mere literary flourish. He means it, but what is he referring to? To what is he referring? There it is. By the grace of Vyasa, I have heard the supreme secret of yoga, Guhyam Param Yogam, from Krishna, the supreme Lord of yoga, appears directly before my eyes, speaking it himself. Remember, Sanjaya is in the palace with the blind king, 80 miles south of the battlefield, and yet he heard it being spoke to him directly. Let us also be Sanjayas. Let us hear this conversation directly, as Sanjaya did. So let us begin as Arjunas, but let us end up as the saved Arjuna and even maybe a Sanjaya, where we can hear and see this dialogue and treasure it in such a way. The seed or bija question to which the whole teaching of the Bhagavad Gita is a response is really this question that we talked about earlier. How do we act in a world of conflict, pain, and suffering? Right there in the first verse. Kimakurvata Sanjaya. Oh, then the last words that Krishna speaks are these. And I highlight in red the key point, the key rhetorical question that Krishna asks Arjuna. Have you heard this whole teaching with thought focused on the single highest point? What is the single highest point? When I was translating the Gita for HarperCollins, I was asking myself, I should really take this seriously. What is that single highest point of the whole teaching? Can it really be said? Can it be verbalized? What is the single highest point? So I kept looking, what is that single highest point? Well, Richard Charles Zahner of Oxford University, and published by Oxford University Press, produces a Bhagavad Gita, which frankly is not a bad translation. And he goes to a commentarial tradition in India that's quite venerable. And I appreciated his translation. But this is what I did not appreciate. He opens up the 11th chapter. This chapter is the climax of the Gita. Excuse me. Excuse me. When does the climax of a text or a movie or a drama appear in the middle? Excuse me, Professor Zahner. I was invited on a podcast many years ago when the Gita first came out. And I didn't usually go on to these things, but the leader of this podcast on the Gita, he had 100 students, They wanted me to come on. I said, okay, I'll come on for a week. And I said, ask me anything. So the leader of this group, Bob, said, I have one question for you. And I said, yes, please. He said, I have read through the Gita up through the 11th chapter. That's what this is. And the 12th chapter seems to sort of round things up. And as far as I'm concerned, you could do away with the next 6 chapters. I fainted. I gasped. I fainted. And I was knocked out for at least 2 or 3 days. I don't remember how long it was. Okay, maybe I'm over-dramatizing this a little bit. But, I mean, it was shocking to me. But in a way, it shouldn't be that shocking because in scholarship, things trickle down. He influenced a kind of regular practitioner, Bob, to say that the rest of the 6 chapters are not really that important. The 11th chapter is where it all sort of climaxes, and then the 12th chapter kind of winds down. This is just absolute foolishness. It just is not that way. Now, there's a reason why someone as intelligent as Zehner considered this. Because there are some Western religionists that consider the overwhelming Aishwarya power of God to be the ultimate. Not in the Gita. That's the whole point of the 11th chapter. Arjuna was given special eyes to be able to see the Virata Rupa, the universal form. This is an Indian depiction of it. And you can see all of the different heads, some of them beneficent, some of them, kind of scary, fire coming out of the mouths. And here's Krishna down here, and Arjuna looking up here. Krishna's down here, but the Virata Rupa is up here, and Arjuna is, frankly, getting rather distracted by all of this up here and scared. It's sort of like good Indian chutney. It's so sweet, you can't resist it, but too hot to taste it. And so he was feeling that here. This is I can't take my eyes off of this, but I'm too scared. This is too scary for me. And so in a way, Zehner was not reading the end of this chapter, where Arjuna is saying, would you please come back to your personal self? This is too much for me. And so it's anticlimactic. Actually, if you read the chapter, it's anticlimactic. And Arjuna definitely begs him to come back, and Krishna acquiesces. And he does come back to his normal personal self. So I don't know, maybe he was speaking from his Christian faith. If you've ever been to Oxford, there are 41 colleges. I've lectured there many times and conducted doctoral exams. But they have 41 colleges, and each one has a church in the middle of the college. It's the most religious university I've ever seen in my life. So, he may be so imbued with this idea of the Christian of power, divine power. But that's not what the Gita is about. The power lies in the love between Arjuna and Krishna. This is where the power is. The releasing of the heart in its fullest to be able to love the divine and love all beings. Which includes your family, by the way. They're last on the list, but you even get to that. Yeah. He says, as a father is to a son, as a friend to a friend, as a dearly loved one to a dearly beloved, be pleased to show your loving kindness. And once again, you may behold my very intimate form, Krishna says. So here I am back. I even got a chance to take a few pictures of this. I mean, here Krishna's coming back to his more personal form. You can see this. And it says, only by the offering of one's love to none other am I able in such a form to be known and to be truly seen. So what is that single highest point? With thought focused on the single highest point. This is a rhetorical question, an instructive question. please understand everything I've said in the Gita, tethered to the single highest point. The question then becomes, what is that single highest point? Well, after years and decades of reading the Gita, I discovered what that single highest point is. So it's in the 18th chapter. It's in the concluding chapter where the conclusion would be expected, not in the 11th chapter. Krishna reveals the great secret, the greater secret, and the greatest secret of all, as we saw earlier. For the first 49 verses are all about finding one's dharma, acting according to one's nature, one's true nature. And I see all my university students really looking for that. What am I going to do in life? The greater secret is about transcendence and the supreme self, Brahman and the Purusha, the true nature of the individual self as well as the supreme self. And finally, the greatest secret of all is about a divine love and a divine yearning. So, and then their concluding words. So, this is the verse, and we'll end shortly, and we can open up for any discussion, but this is the verse that appears right before the greatest secret of all, and this is the verse that speaks about the secrets. Thus for you this knowledge which is a greater secret than the previous secret. So the previous secret is the great secret. This is a greater secret, is made known by me. Having fully grasped this with nothing overlooked, then act as you so choose. These words are so important. The whole Western philosophical argument is, fate versus, free will. Are we really the architects of our future, or the architects of our lives? Or are we just really in a kind of bubble of fate, and we're just kind of carrying through what has been sort of programmed for us in this life? Are we really acting according to our will? The Gita says, no, not when you're in a conditioned state. You're not acting according to your will. But when you come out of that into full knowledge and realization and resolution, then you can act out of will. So, this is why it's so important. Once I had a colleague come up to me after reading my translation of the Gita, and he said, I get it, Graham, I get it. Basically, we're all conditioned souls, and we're helplessly and hopelessly bound to that conditioning. I said, that's what you got when reading my translation? He said, yeah. I said, read it again, George. That is not the conclusion. I said, yes, that's true, only up to a point, but then when one becomes self-fulfilled, self-realized, and one's heart is abundant with affection for the divine and all beings, then one has free will. That's when you have free will, not before that. We may have free will to some degree or to a lesser degree. So that's the great secret, the greater secret. This verse is the verse right before the greatest secret of all, what Krishna terms as Sarva Guhyatamam, the greatest secret of all. Would you like to know what that is? Or do you want to cut it off now and we can wait till later? We can wait till later. I mean, you all must be tired by now. Would you like to go? Okay, that's fine. I mean, it's up to you. Okay, well, here it is. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you don't read Sanskrit. It's in transliteration. It's not in the same Sanskrit characters. Okay, now, the reason I did this is because I want to show you that there is, if you can trust me on this, of course, don't, read the Gita yourself, but there is no verse in the Gita that is as dramatic, as emphatic, and as just extraordinarily expressive as this verse. And this is Krishna playing the flute. This is Krishna's teachings coming out in its very essence. And I color-coded the parts of the verse so you can see the power and emotion in this text. First, Sarva Guhyatamam, the greatest secret of all. If that isn't dramatic enough for you, I don't know what is. Because first of all, it's a superlative, but it's a super superlative. It's not just the greatest secret, it's the greatest secret of all greatest secrets. I call that a super superlative. That would be enough for me. Well, I mean, it wasn't all those decades. I've just discovered this. The greatest secret of all. Extremely dramatic. But if that were not enough, Krishna says, Bhuya Shrinu. Once more, please hear. In other words, please hear it again. I've been saying this throughout the whole text, and indeed he has been. Subtly, there's a thread where Krishna has been giving Arjuna the greatest secret of all, but he wasn't getting it fully, and now he's to get it fully. If that were not enough, my friends, look at this. It is my supreme message. Can you imagine getting a text message from someone saying, this is the greatest message I'll ever send you in my whole life? Wouldn't you read it? I mean, well, I finally read it after decades. I didn't get the text. Pun intended. Okay? I didn't get the text until many, many, many years of delving into the text itself. It is my supreme message. Now, this is all very dramatic. Now, one more little thing that makes it, again, emphatic is all. Quotation marks. In Sanskrit, we don't have boldface, uppercase letters, double strike, underline, emojis. We don't have that in Sanskrit. So if you're going to say it, you got to say it and express it. You do have quotation marks, and that would be the iti right here, iti. But these 4 words right here is the greatest secret of all that he wants all of us to hear again and again and again. It is his supreme message, and here it is. You are so much loved by me. Plain and simple. There's no small writing that says, if you don't obey me, then I will not love you. It's the message that is quiet but most powerful in the Gita. It's the quietest message, but the most resounding message of all. And if we can just realize this, then our hearts can flow effortlessly. It's powerful. So just these 3 verses, beginning with this verse, Krishna reveals his ultimate message. But he couldn't state this at the start. If he started in with the 18th chapter in the 2nd chapter when Arjuna turned to him, he wouldn't have been ready for it. Are we ready for it? That's what we have to ask ourselves. Are we ready for it? And that's, you were asking last night, what's something concrete that we can do? We have to go through this process. We have to go through this process. And then Krishna says, thereupon I shall continue declaring this message for you, which I have set forth into motion. So the idea here is, I've never stopped declaring this. It's always been there. It's been in my embrace, but it's been quiet. I always like to tell that story when I was walking along campus in between classes, and the sidewalks are crowded. You can't blame me for eavesdropping on these 2 young ladies in front of me, right? So I heard one of them say to the other, does Mike still love you? And the other one said, he better, or I'll kill him. Of course, I was shocked, and I decided to back off a little bit from them, and I was a little scared of this young lady, but I was worried about Mike. If Mike had declared his love, professed his love, it was out of duress. And if he was honest and said, no, I don't love you, he'd be dead. That's not the situation here with Krishna. You can't threaten someone to love you. Krishna doesn't threaten you with hell. He doesn't try to coerce you. He doesn't try to force you. he's completely passively embracing us, if that's possible. It's sort of a paradox in that. There's a passive embrace, and yet, when we're ready, he activates a very intimate and close embrace. So that's what the Gita is about. Okay, so let's see here. He says, truly you shall come to me. I promise this, for you are dearly loved by me, and come to me as your only shelter. I grant you freedom from all misfortune. Do not despair. Yeah, that's the, and we'll stop here for questions, comments. We're not done yet, folks. I mean, we have an afternoon session too. Okay. Any comments or reflections or questions? Yeah. Oh, you want to do the mic thing? Okay.
So what it actually means, God loves us. Fortune. So obviously, misfortune is in the eye of the beholder, right? So we don't always get what we want. But the way we are to understand that is whatever God does, he does for good. What happens to us if we follow our dharma is what's supposed to happen to us, even if we interpret it as misfortune.
Good question. And we'll see this in the next Leela that we examine, that while we may feel abandoned in this world, in the small, painful pictures that we may find ourselves in, but the divinity has never lost sight of us. But we may not be close because of our own little painful, conditioned bubble, as exemplified by Arjuna in the beginning of the first chapter. This is why the first chapter is so important. To read the Gita, as some people encourage, to ignore the first chapter is to ignore, really, in some sense, the whole Gita. So Arjuna was in a very painful situation. We can find ourselves in very painful situations. But that pain, sort of in transformed into an openness to something greater. Humans sort of do this naturally. In times of grief, they may go to the mountains. They may go to the ocean, see something much bigger than their lives. They're seeking a greater picture. Arjuna got a greater picture in the 11th chapter, but he got also a greater picture of his heart as he's submitting himself to Krishna's teachings. So I like the way you put it. I mean, yes, from our perspective, it may be devastating on the one hand, but on the other hand, and believe me, we all know there could be absolutely horrifically devastating things in this world, particularly the way humans treat humans. I mean, nature is uncompromising. An earthquake can swallow up 30,000 people in 3 minutes. These things go on, the suffering caused by nature. But I think maybe the worst suffering in some ways is the way humans treat other humans. Just absolutely horribly. And this, I think, is the hell that we're trying to get out of. While we're in or around that hell, what do? How do we live, given that that is there? The mistreatment of the environment, for example. The mistreatment of not just humans, but also animals. The ability for humans to cause so much suffering to other living beings, other sentient beings, is our problem. And it begins with the war inside. Until the war inside is addressed, we'll always enact that war outwardly. And that's why we have our own modern versions of Kurukshetras. Do we need to hear about the new Kurukshetra? Well, maybe enough to just be aware of what's going on, but it's another version of Kurukshetra. Come on. It's just another version of Kurukshetra. Not to diminish or, deny the existence of these things that are going on. Not to say that we shouldn't do something when we can, but not to get so caught up in it that we ignore the war inside. And that's the battlefield we need to enter. With Krishna. Yeah. Don't forget, don't go in there yourself. Take Krishna. Don't forget about that.
Quick question.
Yes.
How do I know I am acting out of a state of free will as opposed to a state of conditioning that is produced by trauma?
Good. Because nothing backfires. If you think you're acting out of will, and clearly the events involved show you that you're not, that you're acting out of still conditioning, then the way things work in life, they always show you that you're not. The way to make sure that we are, again, is to practice these verses, to become more and more realized about what's going on inside, so we can be more in control of what goes on outside. I mean, let's take a crude example of someone who's drunk with alcohol. I mean, have you ever seen someone like that? I mean, I've never been drunk in my life, not with alcohol. But you're not in control. You're slurring your words. You absolutely can't drive, can't do anything. What free will do we have there? That's the pipala fruit, the bittersweet fruit of the world. We can become so distracted by such things. The real issue is how much of a diet, an auditory and visual diet, are we giving ourselves for this internal world purification? Are we giving more attention to the outer world conflicts, or are we paying attention to evolving our own power of our own hearts? So we know it's sort of like eating. You know when you're full, but you also know when you've overeaten. So sometimes we think we've eaten a good meal, but we've overeaten, or we've undereaten. So, we know it. We know when we're really able to act freely from the will. Good question. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I had a question related to Gnan Yoga. A lot of us are drawn to, approaching Vedas, maybe Bhagavad Gita from knowledge. And there's plenty to learn and plenty to analyze.
Oh, yeah.
But I think, I just want to get your opinion. Is that what you meant, like, by heart is, at some point, you're confronted that you're not going to achieve the ultimate knowledge if that's the only means by which you're trying to attain God. And when you let go of it, then you're turning towards the heart. You may still follow that path, but now you're kind of approaching in a different way.
Let me see if I understand what you're asking. So in other words, you can be approaching the sort of jnana dimension of the Gita, but that may not be enough? Is that what you're saying?
Right. If somebody's approaching jnana thinking that they're going to achieve the supreme knowledge through jnana itself, that's not going to be enough.
Right.
When you let go, you may still be drawn to that path. But when you let go and approach it through the heart, seeking that union, at least that's what I got out of your talk. Ultimately, that's when you can actually attain it. Gyan itself by itself is not going to be enough.
Yes, very good. Yes, you said it very well. In the Gita, it states that the perfected state of yoga in the 6th chapter is that you love all beings So I decided one day to try to exercise that. I went out on the street and I started walking up to people saying that I love them. And they said, "You don't even know me." And I said, "Well, no, but I in the Gita, it's, no, I'm obviously making this up, but no, I think I really did this once. I'm not sure. Anyway, I went, and everyone told me, "You don't even know me. How can you love me?" So knowledge of the beloved, the divine beloved, that's the point of knowing. But knowledge in and of itself, well, I'm around plenty of those people. When I was at Harvard, that's all we did, knowledge for the sake of knowledge and for the sake of a job. I mean, that gets really tedious, these game shows of knowing minutia. And I mean, I just don't know. I get the most depressed if I walk by a game show like this and I see these, for $500, what is I mean, just the futility of that. What on our deathbeds are we going to say, "I'm so glad I learned all of that stuff"? No one's going to say that. On our deathbeds, we're going to ask ourselves, have we loved much and have we loved well? If you can say yes, you can say goodbye to this world and say, "I have done everything I was put here for." Have I loved much and have I loved well? And implicit to that question is, have I been loved much and have I been loved well? Thank you for that. Oh, I think we have to, one more? Okay, I've been given permission for one more.
I have a comment. I came to Yogaville probably 15 years ago.
Okay.
And continued on this journey, but not knowing where this journey was taking me or is taking me, continue. I was introduced to the Bhagavad Gita. I don't even want to say it because it's one of those words.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll work on that later. Okay, good.
Mainly because of resistance to it. And coming here this weekend, you have given me a perspective that I did not have. So I want to thank you for that. And the other thing I want to say is that because I believe, because I came here 15 years ago and continued in the curiosity of what not only the Bhagavad Gita
That
says,
text,
that text is, but it has opened up a world for me beyond my wildest dreams.
Oh, wonderful.
So thank
Wonderful.
you. Thank you.
These are wonderful words. Well, I don't know about the rest of you, but this lady's well on her way. I hope you catch up to her. It'd be nice. I hope to catch up to you. Yeah, it's wonderful. Well, thank you all so much, and we shall continue with more surprises this afternoon. So have a good rest of the morning, and we'll see you later.